I got it. That's a pretty good act, kid. What do you call it? The Aristocrats.
Yeah.
We will just for that we will revisit your Photoshop editing later on in the show, Pete. So, all right, welcome to the Lovecraft Easing podcast. Today is May the 6th, 2018. We have a guest today, Michael Cisco. Hey, Mike.
Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Reasonably well.
And Joe Pulver is with us today. I'm going to have an easy day because I'm delegating much of the interview to Joe Pulver, who has known Michael Cisco a very long time, very familiar with his work. Not that the rest of us aren't, but I think Joe's familiar on a level that we aren't. So this will be good.
Let's a big fan.
Yeah. Let's do introductions real quick, and then Joe can talk to Michael Cisco. Let's start with Pete.
I'm Pete Rollick, so you don't have to be. Writer, madman, catcher of large fish.
Matt.
I'm Matt Carpenter. Pete doesn't share his amberjack.
Yeah.
You didn't expect him to, did you?
Mr. Pulver.
I'm Mr. Pulver, apparently. Even though I just looked in the mirror and all I saw was Joe.
Okay.
I'm a writer. I'm an editor. I'm the mayor of Carcosa. I like naps.
That's for sure.
And we have a guest panelist with us today, John Padgett. Hey, John.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
So I'm John Padgett, budding author. I'm the creator and administrator of Thomas Legati Online and the co-editor-in-chief of Vasterian.
Yeah. Issue 2 is coming out when?
It should be June. Yeah.
Okay.
Not soon.
That's
Great.
Very cool.
All right, Joe, you want to take it away and ask Mike to talk a little bit about himself and then go from there?
Okay, sure. Well, let's. For those people that don't know Cisco's just mind-blowing, staggering original work, which deserves every accolade you've heard thrown at it or heaped upon it. You have something like 13 novels, give or take. You have a collection of short stories, The Secret Hours out. Can you tell us a little bit about your work just generally before we start to get specific later?
Well, yeah, I guess I could start out by saying sort of how it connects to weird fiction maybe a little bit, or to the left.
All right, well, first off, all right, let's
Or you just like summarize what I've done, like the various books?
all right, well, okay, Campbell, Legati both call themselves horror writers, specifically. Do you consider yourself a horror writer? Do you consider yourself a weird fiction writer? Do you bounce? Do you defy categorization?
I don't know that I defy it. I play with it. I work around with it. I think a lot of what interested me was looking at how you could draw elements that aren't normally considered part of weird fiction into weird fiction. So, like one thing that I noticed that you do a lot is that, if you read Joe Pulver's work, you see there's a lot of work with the words on the page very often, how they're laid out, how they're presented.
Yeah.
I see you taking from poetry.
Right.
It's not something we're accustomed necessarily to seeing in weird fiction, but you draw on these resources to sort of refresh weird fiction. Or when you look at, say, a writer like Legati, one of the reasons that Legati and I hit it off to the extent we did was that we both really love Thomas Bernhardt. Not a writer who's associated with weird fiction particularly, but there are resources or affects, things that he does that you don't really see in weird fiction, and so you can use that to kind of pollinate and enrich weird fiction without remaining narrowly confined to it. So but I didn't set out to fulfill like a checklist of horror tropes when I write. I just sort of wrote about what my life looked like to me, and it just sort of came out that way.
Okay. Now, when it comes, like I said, you have something like 13 horror novels, and you have a collection, like I said, Secret Hours of short stories, and you must easily have enough short stories for one, if not two, other short story collections. Do you prefer one medium over the other?
You mean short stories as opposed to longer work?
Yeah.
I'm usually a little bit more comfortable with novels because there's room for the ideas to sort of spread out and to, sort of get into trouble with each other. Whereas with a short story, I really had to learn how to write a short story. It was very difficult to stay focused and not go off the beam, but just deliver one
Get
point.
to the punchline. I got you. Yeah.
1 point. I guess my imagination is kind of more diffuse than that, and so it's kind of hard to stay on target. So I had to work really hard to make that, to come up with what I thought were viable stories. I still struggle to write stories.
And that seems so odd to me because I can remember back in the day when we first met, in the 90s at Bob Price's,
Yep.
and we would bring work to read, and I would sit there and you were reading this stuff you were just writing, short work, and I always found it amazing work. It was like, wow, what the hell did I just read? And I know there were several occasions where I said, can I have that hard copy so I can take it home and reread it? And you kindly did that a bunch. And I have a lot of that sitting over there on the shelf in a file. And I read it and reread it and reread it and reread it. And I just thought, because you're, I think, 15 years younger than me, something like that. I just was blown away that you were that young, well, to me anyway, and that talented. I thought your work, even back then, was just magic. I mean, I would go home on one hand, there was all this creative energy from hanging out, and on the other hand, can't write like that, so why am I bothering?
Oh, well.
No. Now you have a second collection in the works.
Yep. Yeah. Jared Walters from Centipede approached me about doing a second collection because he put out the last edition of Secret Hours as part of the Centipede box set.
The box set. Yeah, I know. I was privileged to write that introduction.
Yes, thank you for that kind introduction too. And that version of Secret Hours is somewhat expanded from the version that originally was published by Mythos. So there's some stories in there that haven't appeared anywhere else. Some are rare, and there's one that hadn't appeared anywhere else. And so Jared came up to me again and suggested we do another sort of one-off anthology, and that's in the works. So that probably would happen in about a year. And
that's wonderful. Because, like I said, I absolutely huge fan of your short work. And that is not to take away from the novels. The Divinity Student. I don't know why I always want to jump right to the San Beneficio canon. But like most of other people, I would recommend people start with the Divinity Student. And those who've read a few of your novels and enjoyed them, it's like everybody run as fast as you can to get your paws on language, which is just I love the concept, of the book, but then it's the writing itself. It's like I can't think of anyone who could even think about doing what you've accomplished. You're reading a book, and yet it's almost in a language you've never read before. It's just it's baffling and engrossing at the same time. I found it difficult to put down.
Hopefully not too bad.
No. It's not in any. There's nothing negative, I would say. It's like meeting somebody you've never met and you know absolutely nothing about, and yet you're so comfortable with them, and everything they tell you, you should have known. It's a strange, wonderful thing.
Thank you.
On Language is the newest book, right, Michael?
Yeah, it only just came out about a month ago from Eraserhead Press.
Could you it's a very, 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 very different book, but can you kind of describe it
Yeah, sure.
a bit for those who've not heard about it or read it yet?
Yeah, well, the idea for the book came to me, if I can just sort of go off on this it might take a minute or two.
Yeah, please.
Absolutely. Talk away.
Okay. I remember there was a time I was studying Greek, and I suck at Greek, believe me. And the grammar is unbelievably complicated and fiddly. And in the book I was reading, there would be these little readings interspersed amongst the lessons. And one of them was about, this was all ancient Greek stuff. And one of them was about a man who goes crazy on board a ship, and he starts trying to chop a hole in the bottom of the ship, and the sailors chase him all over the ship, and eventually he jumps overboard. And the sort of main character asks the captain, well, aren't you going to get him out of the water? He's drowning. And the captain says he was a bad man and he'll die a bad death. And that's how that section ends. I'm thinking, this is what you choose to teach your language? Like this sort of bizarre narrative with this sort of ghoulish ending? And I thought, well, that's interesting. Like, what if you had a whole what if you had a whole book like that? Where all the readings were subtly menacing and strange and off-kilter, and were taking you somewhere you we're not taking you anywhere near like in the sort of banal directions you normally go when you're like reading like the Spanish book, and it's like, where's the bathroom and how do I find the train station? It's not that at all. And you're wondering, what do I use this language for? So that was one of the nucleuses for the book. So the book presents itself as if it were a workbook or a textbook in a language that doesn't exist or quasi-exists. I didn't want to have to create an actual artificial language like Klingon or Elvish and come up with the sounds and all of that. A, there's plenty of that out there. You don't need another one. B, I'm not that good or that patient. And C, then you wouldn't have a narrative there. I wanted to talk instead about a kind of language that inhabits our language. It's a kind of the part of the ghostly part of language that always interested me. And so I wanted to write a language book that would train you to read and write in that language, a language that sits inside English or any language that you might know. And at the same time, this tells the story of someone who is trying to sort of use this language to write their way back from a cult suicide. We have a figure who survived something like a Jim Jones style cult suicide, where everybody drank broken glass, like powdered glass, and died. For some reason, this person is still around even after this, and is trying to sort of write his way back, find his way back from that side through this language. So that's kind of the narrative that weaves in and out through these more kind of schematic sections describing the grammar of this bizarre language. So it was a chance for me to play with grammar and also to tell a story. So every chapter is some rules that are largely incomprehensible, but suggestive in a hopefully menacing way, and then a fragment of a narrative which gradually accretes over time. That was the idea.
Matt, you have a question, and then we'll flip back over to Joe, and then I think in a little bit John has some questions as well.
Yeah, this is kind of in medias phrase, but maybe our viewers don't know you very well. I'm kind of interested in, like, where are you from? What was your schooling? What got you into writing? I understand you're teaching now. Just some of the basic things about what brought you to this point in becoming an author.
Okay. Well, I'm from Los Angeles, and I grew up there. I went to college at Sarah Lawrence and SUNY Buffalo, where I got my master's degree in English. I did go to Oxford for 1 year, and that's really where the idea of the divinity student came to me. As a sort of study abroad thing, and then I got my PhD from NYU right around 2004. So I got my PhD, and I've been teaching at Ostos Community College in the South Bronx for 10 years. As far as how I became a writer, I'd always been writing stories for as long as I can remember, or making up stories. And it was something I think I always knew I wanted to do. Reading always meant a lot to me. I'd always loved to read, and in particular loved fantasy and then science fiction and horror. So I sort of moved through a trajectory of those on my way into reading, what gets called the classy literature too. And so wanting to be a writer, I don't know, I guess I always had a facility with language. I was always interested in language. And I guess I started out being very much intrigued by writers like Tolkien. I remember, when you open up The Hobbit and there's that map, right? And it's a map of a place that doesn't exist. And I was 8 or 9. I didn't know you were allowed to do that you could just do a map. And it struck me as an amazingly ambitious thing to do, and then to invent a language. Although, he didn't invent the characters quite as much as I thought he had, but still, that struck me as so wildly ambitious and such an audacious thing to do. It wasn't like Oz or a place like that that's really just kind of a circle on a map with it's sort of arbitrarily subdivided. He was really trying to emulate a place. And I guess that segued into Lovecraft very naturally to me because of Lovecraft's fascination with documents and also with language, and the way that Lovecraft could sort of re-enchant the world around me by implying that there was, that's not just a derelict town, that's a gateway to another world. There was a re-enchantment of the world that happened, a dark one, but that happened through Lovecraft. It's what I found in Ligotti too, for that matter. Ligotti's love of crumminess and tedium and his attraction to these things and seeing them as otherworldly struck me as a remarkable accomplishment. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that kind of gives the background a little bit. My first novel came out in '99, and I've been publishing novels ever since, and short stories here and about. I think that's my career in a nutshell, more or less.
Joe?
Yeah, that's a good description, and I was going to get there, Matt. I promise I was. All right. Well, you talked about your past work, and it might be soon, but I'm greedy. So, what's imminent? What's coming? And then, what are you working on?
Well, what's coming right now is there's the short story collection. Then I have some publications happening in France. My novel Animal Money was translated into French and it's being published there this fall. And then they're going to be releasing, I think the next one is going to be a French translation of The Tyrant, which is my 4th novel. That'll be coming out, I guess, in 19, something like that. And otherwise, I'm just kind of shopping stuff around. I have a novella called Ethics about birds.
Birds is great.
I posted a snippet of that on my blog a couple of years ago. I read a bit of it at ReaderCon. I've got a fantasy novel, sort of, that I'm also shopping around. And as for what I'm working on now, I have a novel that's nearly done. It's taking a little bit longer to tighten all the screws and to sort of bring out what it's really all about. But I have a complete manuscript, and I just need to keep working it over. It should probably be done by around the summertime, and then it goes out, gets shopped around as well. So that's what I'm working on. Also, in nonfiction, I'm working on I've been working for a long time on a monograph about weird fiction. And the sort of theoretical part is done, and now I'm doing case studies to sort of illustrate what I'm talking about, and that would be a short book that I'm hoping to be in a position to pitch maybe by the end of the year, depending on how quickly I can get it done.
Well, can you talk just a little bit more about that?
Sure.
That sounds very interesting.
Well, this would be an extension of the sort of stuff I was doing for my dissertation, and there I was trying wildly overambitiously to talk about kind of weird fiction or the supernatural and philosophy in American literature, with a main focus on like Hawthorne, Poe, and Melville, and it kind of grows out of that. One thing that struck me about Melville, for example, is that he's not considered a weird writer, but his work is replete with weirdness in places. You can't call Moby Dick a weird novel, I don't think. I don't think that works. But are there moments when it's weird? Yeah, absolutely. Definitely moments where it's weird. And there's places all throughout Melville's work where it becomes weird. Looking at weird fiction, I'm basically trying to do a genre study. And so, I don't know if you know The Fantastic, that book by Todorov, Tsvetan Todorov. That's a book that a lot of people refer to when they talk about the genre. Maybe you know it. It was published in the 70s. And I always had a problem with it. I always kind of hated that book and pissed me off. It took me a long time to figure out what I didn't like about it. And basically he says that true weird fiction raises the possibility of the supernatural without confirming or denying its existence. And then he had sort of these offshoot categories for stories that have overt supernatural, and then other stories where it turns out the supernatural thing was a mistake, right? Make sense?
Yeah.
So like, I thought, yeah, but how do you ever know the supernatural ever happened? I mean, what do you mean to confirm it? What does it mean to say it didn't happen? What does it mean to say that it, I mean, of course you don't know if it happened. So how does this, it doesn't work. It's like it makes the whole story hinge on a question that's not really the most important one. And so from that time forward, I was relentlessly trying to the best of my abilities to find another way to approach weird fiction, where you could talk about the genre without just making it into a laundry list of tropes or something really limiting, something that kind of gets at what it's about, like why we like it, like what's it doing for you. And in a nutshell, we get to the meaning of the word weird. It means bizarre, it means something out of the ordinary. But it comes from the Old English word for destiny. You're weird, like, you know, you're weird, that's your destiny, right? And so I was trying to understand weird fiction in that sense, that a weird story involves an encounter with something that is bizarre. Something that destabilizes your idea of what reality is and what normal is. And then also has to do with like the story itself. And this is something I've struggled hard to explain. But you know how, like, if you know you're a character in a horror story, you're doomed, right?
Right.
Like the story is out to get you. It's gonna get you. So there's this feeling like some stories can even thematize that. One story I like to talk about, and it's a chance for me to shout out to the story, which I don't think is anthologized that heavily. But has anyone read this? It's called Private Keep Out by Philip MacDonald. This one?
No, that doesn't ring a bell.
Is it in the Vandermeers the Weird by chance?
No, it's in.
Oh, okay.
I believe it's in one or the first or second volume of Black Water. Do you know that compilation?
I don't.
It's the Spanish editor named Manguel, Manguel, did a big 2-volume set of weird fiction called Black Water. It was published in the 80s. You probably have to get a used copy. But it was in there, and You all know the story, you just don't know you know it, because it was adapted by Richard Matheson, and eventually became a Twilight Zone episode. And When the Sky Was Opened, you remember that one?
Is that the one with about the 3 astronauts?
Right, and they disappear one by one?
I love that one. That's probably my favorite Twilight Zone.
Well,
Yeah.
you're in luck, because that's based on this story. Although the story doesn't have anything to do with pilots, but it's the same idea.
Yeah.
With a slight variation.
It's just not explained at all in the Twilight Zone.
Pretty much. It's just someone somewhere made a mistake.
Right.
And I remember watching that. I was a big Twilight Zone fan when I was a kid, and I was just enthralled by this because there's no monster, there's no menace, there's nothing there. It's just the story went wrong. And so you have to be edited out now. And there's nothing you can do about it. You can't protect yourself. It's just the nature of the story. And the Philip McDonald story is similar. These characters basically are just sort of, they're drunk, it's after a party, and they just kind of start talking philosophy, and they just figure it out. They figure out the meaning of everything. They don't say what it is. They just figure it out. And then it becomes clear that if you figure this out, you have to go. So the main character, he gets this phone call from one of them, and the voice is going away. He drives to their house, and it's a park. There's no house at that address. There's a park with old trees. Nobody knows who these people are. Nobody has ever heard of them before. They've been edited out retroactively from reality. And that story kind of distills, I guess, what I mean by destiny. That there's something like horror stories that are weird tales, and how they end is really important. The end is always important. I guess that's sort of what I mean by destiny. If you think of a Robert Aikman story, I think it was Sonia Taft, you may know, the poet and writer. She said once that like Robert Aikman stories, they all seem to happen after they're over. They all seem to be over before they begin. It's like it's all aftermath. And then there's the sense of, okay, what happened? Like, what was the ending? The whole story depends on that. So, I mean, that plus bizarre is kind of like my recipe for trying to understand weird fiction in a way that I don't find as contradictory as, say, Todorov's approach. And I'm doing some case studies. I just did a Legati story, which I sent to John for Vestarian. Good. Right, I did one. I decided to pick a story by Legati at random, just to see if I was cherry picking stories that I thought were right, or if I could apply these ideas to anything. So that's a bit about the book. I mean, I still have to finish it, but I mean, the theoretical part is all good to go. I just need to get more case studies, more stories I like.
All right. From Mike Davis back to Joe Pulver.
Okay. Themes. Is there any particular theme you find, or themes you find yourself drawn to, and beyond that you return to? Have you used a certain theme, whether it appeals to you or because it's for some other reason? Have you used it more than once?
Yeah. I guess language, certainly. Insanity and what insanity is. Homelessness, for some reason. A lot of my characters are homeless or have no kind of fixed place in the world, in the sort of ordinary world, or what we call the ordinary world. Like, they don't have jobs or houses. Religion, and in particular cults or tight-knit religious groups, interest me a lot. Abstractions interest me. There's something perverse about abstractions that I like to play with. And there's probably more, but for some reason it's difficult for me to put my fingers on those things. I guess my main preoccupation is just creating something that is alive and that has its own problems and concerns. So I guess you could say I have a kind of interest in philosophy that gets reflected in my writing too. You could put it like that.
Okay. Do you listen to music when you write?
Yes, although not necessarily while I'm writing, but usually what I'll do is listen to music before I write, or actually before I sit down to write. I always listen to music before I write. And I get ideas while listening to music, and I'm jotting down notes as the ideas come.
Okay.
And then once I know what I want to do and I'm quite sure that I have it, or reasonably sure, that's when I sit down and I write it, and I try not to hem and haw and stare at the screen a lot. I try to write what I want to write, and then if I feel my attention starting to flag, I quit. So I really want to, so I really do use the music almost as a kind of prism, like to focus, or lens, I guess I should say, to focus before I write. And then usually I'm looking for an affect in the music, something like whatever I want the part to feel like. So sad music or happy or whatever. Get into that frame of mind, get that emotion as clear as I can get it, so that it at least is real. And then write from there, and then out. That's mostly how I try to do it. I don't like tinkering too much. Yeah.
So, all right, when you say you hone in, you focus, then you stop, and then you write.
Mm-hmm.
You're writing short stories in a single setting?
Not always. I would like to, but my stamina gives out kind of fast.
Oh, okay.
So, but it is true with a short story, I try as much as possible to nail it all down in one go, at least for the first run through.
Okay. Yeah, well, I figured editing is a separate story, but you know.
The more times I come back to it, the more crap I start shoving into it, and then it loses focus. So I really need to kind of hit it and quit it if I'm going to make a short story work.
Yeah, I
think it's different.
can fully appreciate every time you go back to it. Oh, should I say this here? Oh, maybe I should expand that. Are they going to understand this? I got you.
The next thing you know, it's too big.
Yeah, they tend to get fat that way.
Yeah.
All right, it's Lovecraft Easing, so can you talk about your introduction and enjoyment of Lovecraft, and from there go into other influences?
Okay. Well, I hit upon Lovecraft at the right time, like 12, 13. That's sort of like the golden hour for discovering Lovecraft and being a disillusioned young man and all that. I was getting his books out of the library, so they were this sort of musty old books with the Lee Brown Coy illustrations and things like that. Or that weird one with, I think it was the one with Durleth, what has like the hypno disc thing in the middle with the tentacles around it. And I don't know which one is that. Yeah, I think so. I wouldn't swear to it, but I think so. I've been interested in like horror fiction, and Lovecraft was just one of those names I'd heard a lot. But in those days, right around 1981, 1982, I think the Del Rey editions were only just kind of coming into their own then, the ones with the silver Michael Whalen covers.
Okay.
Right when those happened. I was a little bit before that, and so there was like a minute there where it was a little tough to find Lovecraft, and I was getting him out of the library, and I felt like I discovered something intriguing and different. Like people didn't talk about Lovecraft back then as much. He was a totally minor.
Yeah.
In 1981, 1982, nobody read it. Unless you were like a serious hardcore horror devotee. It was like he was a niche writer. Like the ubiquity now was nowhere. Sorry?
Around 1970 or so, there were 5 or 6, whatever. They had John Holmes covers.
Oh, right.
And they were everywhere.
Okay.
And a lot of us bought them mostly because of the covers. I mean, I bought the Tomb because it has the red face split down the middle.
Yeah.
There's the bar with the chain and the bats fly. It was like, I don't know what this is, but I got to read that. It's just like, this might be the greatest cover I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But those disappeared, and you're right, it was a while before the next wave showed up. Quite a few years, seems like.
Yeah, read a fair amount. Sorry.
And you're right. There was those people who had bought them for those Holmes covers were aware, but it doesn't seem like anybody else was at all.
No, he was still
But-
a minority figure. I think people like Stephen King did a lot to popularize him when people started to ask King about who his influences were. I think he steered a lot of people toward Lovecraft. And you had people like Mosig, who was, pioneering the early days of Lovecraft scholarship and so on.
Right.
But there was still no major biography. Joshi's biography was a long time away, and there wasn't a lot about him, and there's no web. So I just, I would ferret out these books here and there, and they were like treasures, and so I, gradually started to read them and then accumulate them. So I got more and more into them. And I guess what I loved about them was, like I say, the way that they re-enchanted the world by implying that there were mysterious and exciting, if terrifying, things going on behind the scenes. And that just seemed manifestly obvious anyway, but it was giving a name to these things, creating a kind of vocabulary that you could share with friends. There was something contagious about those stories, and you could see it in the mythos where you read stories, you just end up having to kind of write one yourself. Certainly, even Borges, although he apologized profusely for it, he wrote his Lovecraftian story. So I don't know. I caught it at that time, and I guess I love the bookishness of it and the way it. And so a lot of my interest in other influences spawned right out of supernatural horror and literature, or other connections through Lovecraft. So I was just using that as a reading list and say, who is our Arthur Mackett? Who is our Eldred Blackwood? What is this Dunsany thing about? It's like, oh, Dover does a crappy paperback of, wasn't that crappy? Paperback of Dunsany's work. What's that? And then, I started to realize there was this whole world of writers I didn't know. And then subscribing to like Crypt of Cthulhu, when it was, stapled in the middle and typeset by his mom and so forth. And reading the stuff in there, in particular reading Legati in there, before Legati was really a name to conjure with at all. These stories that would every now and then pop up, and understanding that there was this was something going on here, that this was really good. These were not just trite, recycled horror stories. This was really different. That this particular corner of the scene had some life to it. Like there was some kick in here, like someone's thinking, someone's doing something new with what could be a very, very hackneyed style. Or hackneyed format. So there's that, and then in my other scholarly reading, I was being introduced. I felt like I had to read all the major canonical writers to be a decent English professor. So I had to read very widely, take all kinds of classes, and Chaucer and this and that. I was encountering good writers all the time, and I was always interested too in writers who were not originally writing in English. Growing more interest, like the Russians or, European writers like Hoffman or Walzer and Kafka or Jean Rey, the surrealists, anybody who's doing anything strange, anything imaginative, anything that was off the beaten track, I became fiendishly determined to get my hands on those books. Again, this was largely pre-web, so you really had to glean names from essays and introductions and footnotes and say, this like Krzatok the Human Onion. That's a book. Somebody wrote a book called Krzatok the Human Onion. And it was published like in the turn of the 20th century. And it's like, you put it on the list. I got to read a book about the human onion. There's just no way I can't. I got to. No way. And so it's got to be on the list. That's got to be amazing. And like, I think Wakefield eventually put it out like 2 years ago. And like, that's the book. And and there it was. And Wakefield has been especially good for that, and Valancourt is good for that too. Books that like books that Lovecraft mentioned in passing, and you never see them, and now you can read them. And so yeah, I was just endlessly following more and more and more. I got sort of greedy. I wanted to read everything. So my influences, William S. Burroughs was a huge influence on my writing. You talk about listening to me read, and that's because I learned to write by reading Burroughs. I'd heard him before I read it, because there are all these recordings of it.
Yeah, there's a million recordings, and I love to listen to Burroughs read.
Right, and I'd heard him read before I ever really knew anything about him. I read Naked Lunch, and I didn't really get into it, but I went back to it, and when I started to hear his voice as I read, the book came alive to me, and then I realized I could do that. That's how I should write. I have to hear it, it has to be oral for me. Like, it has to sound right in my mind. And so, reading aloud is kind of integral to how I write. The sound of the words is crucially important. They have to sound just so. And Burroughs was one who somehow he removed a mental roadblock for me and enabled me to suddenly start writing that way. And it's not like I was any good. I was still having to write a lot of crappy journeyman stories, but I mean, that was probably the single most important shift for me, was that. So it was him and writers like Kafka, the modernists, and people like Joyce and Beckett and so forth. I wanted to learn how to do whatever it was they were doing. Like, what are you doing? What is this? How do you do this? Kafka, to this day, I don't know how he composes. I don't know where these ideas, there's just no precedent. It doesn't come from anywhere. It's like a miracle. Every story is weird. How did you think like this? So I was constantly on the lookout for people who could show me things that I could use in my own work that would help me to express myself in my own way. That's a way to boil it down. There are a lot of writers that I really love.
Can I jump in real quick, Joe?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike. Sure.
Can you tell me the title of that story that inspired the Twilight Zone, Richard Matheson Twilight Zone episode again?
Me?
Yeah.
It was called Private Keep Out. It was by Philip MacDonald, MacDonald.
Private Keep Out by Philip MacDonald.
Yeah.
Okay, it made me think of, I had to go with my bookshelf and grab it, and I've mentioned it on this show before, but not for a long time. I read this book when I was, 11 or 12. It was published in 1979, and it just made me think of it because it's about this 17-year-old kid who very, very gradually starts to realize that people aren't paying attention to him. He tried to catch the attention of the McDonald's server, and can't do it until he tries for the 8th time, and it keeps getting worse and worse and worse over the course of. It's called Displaced Person by a guy by the name of Lee Harding.
I don't know it, but it sounds familiar. I don't know.
Yeah, and because I didn't know the term was weird fiction back then or anything like that, but you're telling that story made me think of this. And so until, after about, I don't know, a week of this, he can't touch anyone. He's sort of in this, he can walk around the world, but he's in this sort of grayish sort of existence where everything he sees is gray, and he can't interact with anybody. If he tries to touch somebody, he just sort of bounces off of them. Eventually he bumps into two or three other people who are just like him, and their theory is that they've been forgotten or something. They don't know what's going on. And that's the thing, you never, just like the Twilight Zone episode and your story that you were telling us about, you never find out what's going on. And what happens at the end is that what happens in the story is he's narrating all this into a tape recorder, because he says the darkness is closing in. He's lost the 2 people that he's with. They've just disappeared. He has no idea where they went. And then suddenly the tape recorder just ends in mid-sentence. And there's one chapter left where he says he accidentally, we'll have your question next, John, where he finds this tape in a pocket, and he listens to the tape, and it's him. You know, he's back in his normal life, but he doesn't remember any of this happening. You know, so he never finds out what was going on. He just thinks that obviously there's something behind the scenes adjusting reality, and it missed the tape recorder.
Ah.
You know, so yeah, it's a very interesting story. It's a novel. John, you got some questions?
Yeah. So before I ask, I just wanted to mention that long before I read your work, I heard about you from Tom Ligotti, and over the years he's been extremely praising of your work. Both on the sentence level and on the imaginative level. You know, one of I'm sure you're familiar with the quote in which he calls you a masterful literary maniac, which I think is true. Absolutely. And you know, in talking about process, you know, the mention of Kafka made me think. Do you have a standard process from the idea's inception to the finished product, or if not, can you describe the process of one of your recent works, like On Language, your newest book, and how long does a novel usually take for you?
To answer your last question first, a novel for me, usually I spend about a year doing what I call accumulating, where I'm just basically piling up notes, getting ideas and just throwing them down. You know, I got into the habit a long time ago of carrying a notebook everywhere I went, and anytime anything comes into my head, just boom, put it in the book, boom, put it in the book, put it in the book. You don't know what it's for, but just put it in there. And so usually I get a bunch of ideas, and then I put them into what I call a junk drawer file. I put them all in one big file. And very often just in typing them up or in reviewing several days worth of material, you'll see ideas or sort of lending themselves, kind of little ideas kind of starting to emerge. But mainly I'm waiting for the big idea that's going to come along that will unify a bunch of different little ideas. Mm-hmm. That usually takes about a year to happen. And then I spend a year writing. And so the process there is that I don't like to be very precise in how I outline a novel. I'm talking about novels now. Short stories, it's more like I almost never have enough time to do a short story. I'm almost always asked to do one. I don't have enough time. I just have to find a moment and just like put it down, and then like get it into some kind of palatable shape so I can send it off. But with a novel, I don't outline extensively because it kills it for me. Mm. I want to continue to make discoveries as I write. So I want to start establishing things, and then I want to see what new developments arise. Because I want the book to be alive. I want it to be spontaneous. So I want it to move for reasons of its own. Mm. This is a real problem because then, you know, like when I sent the divinity student manuscript to Ligotti, he wrote back and he said, I think I told you this once, that it was clear I knew what was going on, but the reader didn't necessarily know enough about what was going on. And so I've always kept that kind of thing back in the back of my head when I go back over my books. And it's been a process of learning from book to book. With the divinity student I started at the beginning, I wrote straight through to the end. Now I will, and I wrote it in distinct chapters. So it was like running in spurts. And then, wait, catch your breath. All right, another. Whereas now I tend to write the books in one continuum. And as I write, I'll reach a point where something starts to change or develop, and then I'll go back and make adjustments to bring that out more. Mm-hmm. But I'm trying to sort of keep it on track, but without dictating too much to the book, so that it can tell me what it wants to be. That is tough, but that's basically how it works. And so I do that, and then I go through and I kind of tighten stuff up. my biggest issue is just very often I'm writing like from right here, like I'm right up close, and I have to keep pushing back and saying, all right, how does this all go together? And so, because I'm usually just kind of going line by line by line by line and right in it. And so getting back out and seeing how it all fits together used to be onerous. Now I've learned to kind of enjoy it more. And so, and to see, oh, I could pivot this whole section and just play with bigger pieces. So yeah, that takes about, it takes about 2 years to do it all for a book typically. With on language, I had to think of different grammatical concepts that I thought were interesting. And that was the conceit dictating kind of the content. And then I had the story that was unfolding kind of at its own pace. But yeah, that was a book that, so I wrote that about a couple or three books ago. So I might be a little foggy on the details, but the structure of the book, the kind of regularity of the structure really helped me compose it. And to, I wanted to make sure nothing went on for too long because I didn't want anything to be too burdensomely abstract or, I got very wary of being too descriptive and being too lavish and overwriting things. I didn't want to do that.
Sure.
So that and reading things aloud and hearing what works and what doesn't, as opposed to just seeing it. That was also important.
Okay, let me jump in here for a second, and then
sure.
Then you guys can ask again. But he just mentioned something, and all right, you mentioned pulling out your little notebook and making notes.
Yeah.
And the first time that happened, I took the train down to New York, and we met at the train station. And we were taking a train over to Bob's house, Bob Price's, to hang out. And we were on the train, and you pulled out your little black notebook, and you started writing. Okay, I write, I make notes all the time too, except for what blew my mind was your writing was so tiny. I thought, wow, you'd need a magnifying glass, if not two, to be able to read what you had just written.
Mm.
But then again, I could tell that it wasn't a scrawl. I mean, this was precise lettering.
Mm.
It just was super tiny. So if you're working on a computer, and this is a dumb question, I'm just curious, what kind of font do you use?
Well, just the last John. Sorry, bye, John. The font I use?
Yeah, I mean, I use 12 point,
I use
which
like
is
10
a
or 11.
fairly good size.
I use 10 or 11 these days. I mean, my eyesight is lousy now, so.
Okay. I was just curious. It's like, I
Yeah.
wonder if he wrote like 5 point, or something.
No.
Because, like I said, I'm sitting there watching you write these notes, and it's like, how the hell can anybody write that small? And then I kind of leaned in, being a busybody, and it's like, it looked like this was very precise writing. I mean, it didn't look like I would the way I scrawl stuff. I mean, it looked like, if you blew this up, this would be very clean. It would look great, And I just thought that was absolutely mind-blowing that somebody could write that small.
It just saves money. I'm cheap. Books last longer, so it's a tiny hand.
Okay, I'll let you guys.
Pretty soon he'll be writing on the heads of pens.
No, it's just getting worse and worse. The irony is I'll never be able to read my old notebooks now. Not without a magnifying glass, because I can't read this crap either. So now it's gotten a little scrawlier as time's gone by. But I use the little pocket-sized notebooks now.
Yeah. Pete, do you have any questions?
I'm just fascinated by the whole process that that Michael's talking about, but I do want to know how he got cajoled into writing a Reanimator story. Because I got the privilege to republish that.
Oh God.
Like, really hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you were one of the hardest people for me to contact.
Oh,
At
sorry.
the time, you weren't in my circles.
Oh.
And I was like, I was really nervous about it. It's like, this dude's a real professional college professor. It's like, I can't just call him up or email him. That's not going to work for me. But yeah,
I wrote it.
How'd that happen?
How did I write the story? 2 words, Bob Price.
Bob Price.
He cajoled me. And he said, you've got to write you've got to write this. You got to write this. You got to write this. I'm like, okay, sure. Why not? I mean, it's like, okay, what can I do to make it impossible I need to write the story that will be impossible to follow. What will kill this character off once and for all? Not that I hate him, but it's just like I had to do it. It's like, okay, we'll have a reunion. We're going to take it to the cosmological level, and we'll just wipe this character out once and for all. And it's like that was a challenge I was willing to rise to. Can I destroy one of Lovecraft's most cherished characters? And it was also a chance to chew the scenery and write, preposterously bombastic prose. It was a blast. I had a great time writing it. I love writing that kind of stuff. It's like you can throw all your good taste out the window and write the most depravedly overwritten purple prose you want, and it's all good. It's all to the effect. So that's how that happened. I take full blame.
Yeah, you should. So apparently, the other one of the highlights of my trip to one of my trips to the film festival was in the Portland Film Festival was a breakfast reading from Unlanguage.
That's right. I did read from that then.
Yeah, and after which I did not realize how high I was.
Okay.
Were you drinking, Rollick?
I was drinking, but Portland had just legalized weed.
All right.
And it was everywhere, and you could not get away from it. And people were just throwing buds down, and the smoke was just, so anyway. Yeah, that Joe.
So you're blaming Portland?
I am.
Okay.
Portland, the whole city got me high.
All right. Gotcha.
But after the reading, Joe is like, "Oh my God, we've got to do an Unlanguage anthology." And we're all like, "You need to write an Unlanguage story right now."
Right now.
I remember that. You wanted to base it on the questions, commonly asked questions.
Yeah. And I did, and it's so bizarre, and it's so not me. But yeah, your reading was one of the highlights of that trip, because Unlanguage is a delve into the very processes that sort of join the conscious, the unconscious, and how we communicate with other people, and what words mean and what they don't mean. And that is the important distinction. It's what words mean is just as important as what words don't mean.
Mm-hmm. Right.
At least that's, and that seems to be an odd discussion to have, but it's one of the key questions that comes out in Unlanguage is that what you say can sometimes be very precise, and can mean not at all what you think it means, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And so right now I'm delving into some very old literature, and there was a book someone cited, and I was dying to read it because it sounds like the perfect Lovecraftian tome. And it's called The Restitution of Decayed Intelligence.
I've heard of that.
And it's written in the 1600s, and it's nothing to do with magic or reanimating the dead, which I thought, that sounds perfect, right? It has completely to do with one guy's attempt to glorify Britain's past history.
Right. But it's a great name.
But it's a great title.
Yeah, great title though.
But yeah, but that feeds into this whole idea that language, the meaning of language changes as well.
Yeah. So
And
what did you hear in that name? You heard
restitution.
there's a different book behind what you heard than what you
Yes.
and you want
Yes.
that book.
I want that book.
Yeah, we want that book. And so it's not Charles Dexter Ward, maybe a little bit. It's not really that. It's something else. And so you want that 17th century book called The Restitution of Decayed Intelligence, but you want it to be scary as hell. And not
Yes.
English
Yes.
nationalism.
Well,
And
Pete,
so
you know what? You know, those guys are long gone. You can probably steal that title and do something with it.
Well, okay, so it is a central plot point in the book I'm writing right now.
Okay.
Okay.
Because I'm not throwing it away, right? It's too good not to use.
Right. And so, the title, it's like all those fleeting ideas when you stumble across a great title and the book doesn't turn out the way you thought it would, and it's like, that's the book you wanted.
Right.
So now it's sort of up to you to make it now.
I don't care what the book actually is. I want that book, and we're going to make that book, and God damn it, it's mine.
Yeah, so unfortunately, you may have to write it. That's the only drawback. You have to write
Yeah,
it.
well, yeah.
Speaking of weird titles, I posted this on my Facebook page a couple of days ago. Now, this is like something I read when I was 9 or 10, but Daniel Pinkwater wrote these great books. You know, I think you and I are about the same age, Michael, so maybe you read some of those.
Oh, I definitely read them.
You know, Alan Mendelsohn, The Boy from Mars. But the really great titles are like The Snark Out Boys and The Avocado of Death.
Yes, right. Well, Lizard Music, that was one of my favorites.
You know, you look at that title, you're a kid and you're walking down the library aisles and you look at that title and you're like, what the hell? I have to read this. Look at this title.
He knew his readers.
Yeah.
What was the one about giant worms? There was one about giant worms in Africa.
Yeah. I don't remember those titles though. And there was one about bagels. Or some, I don't know. Yeah.
He's still with us. He has a Twitter account, as a matter of fact.
Oh, does he? Yeah, he's still alive. He's like 76 or so.
Yep, he's still kicking.
So, I try to remember to ask every writer we have on the show this, because I'm always interested in the different answers that they give. What does success as a writer mean to you personally?
To me, it would mean that I'm being read and that people are touched by what I do, or they feel. I mean, I guess for me, because my interests are kind of abstruse, I suppose. I guess I want to be for other people what the writers I love the most were for me. You know, that, when I remember that so many moments of just pure joy stumbling across this book you've been looking for forever. Nobody ever knew what it was. You wondered if it was even real. But there it is, blam, on the shelf. You found it, or somebody reprinted it. Boom, you've got it. And it's so precious to you. And you read the hell out of that book. It's not something you casually read on the toilet. It's something you really cherish. It's something that means something to you. It's something that shows you something you needed to know, or inspires you to write yourself, or shows you some way to write that you hadn't thought of before. And that means more to me than anything. And so, fame and fortune, they come with big price tags attached. If J.K. Rowling wants to say, all the Harry Potter stuff was just the fever dream of a junkie, and actually he's lying in the gutter that whole time. He's 42, he's unmarried, and all the events in those novels was just his DTs. And it turns out she's been a gritty realist the whole time. She can't do that because her editors and the publishers are saying, that what are you doing to our product? What are you doing to our property? She's not free to do that if she wants to do that. She'd have to write it under a pseudonym or something. So that sort of thing. I always kind of liked the idea of being obscure. Not that I don't appreciate being here, otherwise I wouldn't be here, but you know what I mean? I didn't want to get hyped. I didn't want to be a face. I wanted the work to speak for itself, and I wanted people to respond to the work. The work is like a child. It's got its own life. It's got its own personality, its own face, its own abilities. And so, yeah, I'm responsible for creating this thing and letting it loose on the world, hopefully to create as much havoc as possible. But it's still its own thing. And so, success for me is basically reaching people, activating people, intriguing people. That's it.
if you
Yeah,
want to be
Joe.
activated and you want to be intrigued, I've said this many times before. I've told this to everybody I know several times each. If you ever have the opportunity to hear Mike read, it, as I continue to say, they're not performances, but they're not mere readings. His work just grabs people right by the brain when he's reading it and sends them to places. Everybody, to a person that I've said, you got, there was that Sunday morning in the upstairs at the billiard thing where you and I read, Mike.
Right.
And because I know Cody Goodfellow, I said, you got to hear this guy. You got to hear him read. And afterward, Cody was like, holy shit. What was that? It's like, I don't know, you tell me. But
It was freaking awe-inspiring. That's what it was.
Shucks.
yeah, well, that's where I'm going. Everybody gets their mind blown. I'm not the biggest fan of listening to writers read their work or, audio in general. I would, to me, sitting in my easy chair with a book and reading it that way, that's the tango. But when it comes to Cisco, he's got to be heard at least once. So if you ever have the opportunity, because I know you've read a couple times now in Providence, yes?
Yeah.
At the Lovecraft bookstore there.
Yeah, the silent arts readings. I think I'm doing that again this June. I think I'm on a bill with John Langan and Larry Barron, I think.
Oh.
Well, Joe, I thought we kind of talked him into, before the show started, maybe taking 5 or 10 minutes and doing a reading for us after the questions. Is that okay with you?
I was hoping he would grab anything and maybe read the first half page of any work he picked, just so people would get a sense of that. Yeah. Because as I've said, every person I've urged, after they've come away, they're just like, wow.
You're gonna read but no pressure. No pressure.
Okay. Right.
Just making you do it, that's all.
Okay.
Hey, listen, before we get there,
Okay.
I want to take a real quick diversion. Farrah Rose Smith.
Yes.
Girlfriend, right?
Yes.
I'm interested in, she's got a book on, I've not read her work, and I'd like to highlight her for a minute too. But there's a book by her called The Almanac of Dust.
Right.
And I'm looking at it on Lulu right now. A scholar and metaphysical naturalist cares for his ailing wife as he studies the Almanac of Dust, a cryptic text that documents the presence of unusual manifestations of dust around the world.
Yep.
Could you maybe talk about that for just a minute, and her as a writer? Yeah,
sure. So the Almanac of Dust is a work that she's been putting together for a really long time, and it combines a fictional narrative with philosophical ideas. It's written, I don't know if you can see, but there are a lot of pages where you have sort of the narrative is interleaved with little jottings and notes.
Mm-hmm.
And so the book has a kind of gem-like quality, like it doesn't have sustained narrative passages that are very long. It has sort of 2 or 3 pages and then some fragmentary notes that are all kind of correlated around or constellated around this idea of the almanac. And I can give you a taste of her prose style. A lot of what's going on here has to do with the way it's written. That's one of the things that she and I have in common. There's a lot of attention to word by word and line by line. She's also a superb reader. If you get a chance to hear her read, she read at Necronomicon last time. And she has some stories out and a bunch of other things. This is the novel that she's been working lavishly on for quite some time, and it's published by Wraith Press.
That description was, sorry, Pete, go on.
Didn't she write the Sorcerer Machine in Arkham Horror Book Club?
I'm not sure. I don't think. I may be wrong. I mean, she's gonna get mad if I don't. I gotta be careful.
I was just gonna say before you go on, Mike, that description of the Almanac of Dust, I just thought sounded so fascinating.
It is a fascinating book, and she writes in she's very influenced by the decadents and surrealists, and so the writing has that quality.
Yeah.
The first line is, sorry about my blindness, but I mean I have to lean in to read it. Small electric veins travel through the cloud mist like wandering worms, and that's the first sentence. Right? An evanescent cloud of sapphire. And I'm going to mispronounce the name here, but it seems to be Bodhi's Yusofi, drags himself to his feet, sickened by the fluid undulations beneath him, the impossible fall beyond the mist, unsteady currents of electricity shocking the extremities, and it goes on. So, I mean, it's extraordinarily carefully written and composed. And so, I had no reservations about endorsing it wholeheartedly. So, and it looks beautiful too. So
I think I've got on my desk, was it Eviscerator?
That's right. That's the one. That's a shorter piece that's what she's done for the Eraserhead new Bizarro fiction series, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. She did a shorter one called The Visitor, and I forget because I'm an idiot who published it, but the Eviscerator is the one that she's doing with Eraserhead, and that I'm not even aware that that's out yet. Do you have an advanced copy? Is that what's
I must.
Okay.
I get that. I get those sometimes. I do reviews for New York Review.
Okay.
So
that's why, yeah. So that's imminent, and that's coming out, and then she has various short pieces and various things. She has a short piece in Tragedy Queens, and I'm forgetting. I'm an idiot. But yeah,
I will try to remember to link later in the synopsis on YouTube and also certainly on iTunes and the other audio podcast editions to the Almanac of Dust. But for anybody just listening, you basically search the Almanac of Dust in Lulu, Lulu,
yeah,
and should bring you right to it. $9.99. So yeah, it looks very, very interesting to me.
We need to have her on independently sometime.
Absolutely.
That's a good idea.
And of course, yeah, go ahead.
She is not my girlfriend, but I have read a few of her works, and I think she's just amazing. I really enjoyed what I read of hers. Definitely, I think someone to seek out and be watching. I didn't want anybody biased thinking, oh, it's Cisco's girlfriend. Of course, he's going to be nice. You know,
nice. I'm not nice at all.
well, you are nice, but you wouldn't have brought it up if you just to promote it. But I just want to go on record as, yeah, I agree. This is pretty wonderful stuff.
Yeah, she's the real.
Yeah, absolutely. No ifs, ands, or buts.
Well, like I said, that's a fascinating description, and I've obviously not read it yet, but I'm going to. And of course, I've already linked. You just go to my Amazon and type in Michael Cisco, but I've linked to his Amazon page already, and I'll do that on the audio podcast, of course, as well. So, without further ado, Michael, would you care to read something to us for 5 or 10 minutes?
Yeah, I think I can do that. So I think I'll read, because I have it handy, I'll read from Unlanguage, right? This is...
Unlanguage, right.
I've described it a bit, and let me see. So I'll read, I don't think I need much preamble here. This is from Unit 11, Decomposition Metaphor and Decay Similes. but I'll read you the reading for that, which is more narrative. And you can hear me if I speak at this tone, yeah?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So please excuse my squinting, but the screen ain't too, especially, it's not a lot of light in this room. So here the narrator is basically talking about a kind of a cult called intersuffusion. And I think that's pretty much all you need to know. In the cult, there's been a cult suicide. Our equality at intersuffusion was false. The leader was above us. There was no doubt about that. We all deferred to him, so our equality was real among us, after all, based in our common deference to the leader. We were all his followers, and since he didn't seem to play favorites, but in fact seemed barely aware of us, come to think of it, speaking to us always in a distracted way, as if he were thinking out loud, he didn't look at us either, and kept his eyes concealed behind those huge sunglasses of his. What about the teacher who was his disciple and followed him into death, but was banished from that too? The leader is dead. A bullet exploded his brain. The teacher may not have managed to reach the point of no return in death. If that's true, then choosing to become the teacher, knowing that anyone who teaches on language to others is doomed, might be an alternate route. But I, that is, the third person, don't think so. I think the teacher may know something, or maybe be something, involving secret passages. I don't quite have the right words for it. I mean, he somehow or other comes from or belongs to a dimension that is the abstract essence of the secret passage, the way around. It could be a trick he knows, or a skill, or a bad essence, or a habit, or a tick, or a disease, or a madness, or an organic part of himself. But whatever it is, he seems to have this get-aroundness. So he can reach the point of no return, go past it, and then return anyway, by going around the point of no return. His passport isn't stamped. It could be a strictly negative thing. If he has no real self or soul, then there's nothing really there. A phantom can go by any number of points of no return. Since there's nothing to the phantom, there's nothing to prevent returning. The messenger may flatter himself he's the god in disguise, but in truth, it's the other way around. He is just the disguise. He comes and goes while the message remains. The message doesn't convey information, it just points in a direction. Its existence points to the existence of its source, and that's the real message. There is something there. If people are inclined to puzzle over the messenger, they're confined to peering after him, trying to follow him. Where he comes from, the way he came and went, are all there is to know. The messenger, sitting alone in his room, isn't the messenger anymore. There's nothing he can tell you. The idea of a messenger is a mistake, a necessary mistake. Like the leader, the teacher averts his eyes from us, as if in deference. He faces the front of the classroom, toward the whiteboard. Even if he did face us, there would be nothing to see but silhouettes along the center line. This afternoon, I'm walking down a hall when, happening to glance in a mirror as I pass, I notice with alarm a stain on my mouth, a black lozenge-shaped mark across both lips, a little out from one corner. It's as if someone had dipped a thin finger in ink and pressed it there. My lips part and the mark slips into my mouth like a shadow. Instinctively, I stop my breath, recoiling in fright. I close my lips. The mark is back where it was. Parting and closing my lips a few more times, I see the stain slip in and out of my mouth like a wisp of air. It's like an inky, utterly opaque shadow, a little black spotlight trained steadily on that one part of my face. I recognize the devil's mark. It must have returned with me from the Black Forest. Sometimes it is a stain on my mouth, and other times my left hand darkens as if I were holding it out of the sun. With a distinct shade line a little way up the wrist, and the middle and index fingers cross. The mark is invisible to others, but a long, thin shadow of foreboding follows me wherever I go, like the memory of a long, thin face. It's an omen that never leaves me now, the presentiment of doom in the rustling shade, of spacious rain ceiling to final days. That is the mark of decision, turning me forever away from the community of the blessed. I can't rest, and when some idea tears me violently from sleep, decision is usually there. White gobs of flame oozing from deep lacerations in his cheeks and forehead to gutter up a black iron face. Frost turns white, white with powdery mold, snowflakes stuck to clear, curling shreds of skin that peel from the lips and face. He stands in the room where I try to sleep, a dark figure with hands in his pockets. On its head, a nameless, brimless black hat or cap that might be some kind of clerical vestment. The body teeters as if buffered by wind, although the room is still and airless as a tomb, and the sourceless light is the lunar glow thrown up by snowdrifts. The devil's mark isn't always there, but whenever it appears, it means I am a devil. And like it or not, I am doing the negative work, the work of anger and malice. And under that, it says notes, and it says, see me, circled. And that's the end of that section.
Oh yeah.
Just draws you in. I have not heard you read before,
Thank
Mike. So, yeah, thank you.
Sure.
All right, Joe, Pete, do we have anything else to ask Michael Cisco?
No, go ahead. You guys ask whatever you want.
I think I've got all my questions answered. You did a great job with it. Michael, is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to talk about?
No, I can't think of anything offhand, but then I'm kind of like, I'm still in that mindset for a minute, I think. Like I'm a little dazed for a second or two.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, Michael Cisco's newest book is On Language, which you were just reading from, and you can browse his books at his Amazon page. Just type in Michael Cisco. Actually, 2 or 3 of your books are available for Kindle people. 2 or 3 of your books are available on Kindle Unlimited.
Right.
So, you can, if you're on that program, which I am, it's a great program. Get them and read them. So, Joe, what would you recommend people start with if they've never read one word of Michael Cisco's work?
For the average reader, I would send them to the Divinity student to start.
Okay.
And I think it's a great gateway. Once you've read a couple and you've become a fan, which I'm certain you will, I think On Language is just an amazing piece of work on all kinds, content, concept. It just, reading it, it's like he started with the Divinity Student, which I adore, and it's a great, wonderful novel. It also won, what was it, the International Horror Guild?
Yeah, International Horror Writers Guild Award for Best First Novel in 1999.
Yeah, okay.
Back then.
It won that award. He's had a couple of Shirley Jackson awards since
No, I've
then.
never gotten an award from Shirley Jackson.
Or nominations.
Nominated.
Okay.
You still get the rock. You still get the rock, though. I love that.
I love the rock.
Yeah, you get the rock. You know, it's
So
not easy getting a rock, so that counts. But after you've read a couple others, and you've become a fan, I love Celebrant.
Oh, good.
I really, really enjoyed Member. And like I said, Unlanguage is just never read anything like it. Can't wait to see the next thing. Couple of years back, he had mentioned that he had an old haunted house book which Hippocampus put out.
Right.
And yeah, Wretch of the Sun, right?
Yep.
Wasn't that what it was called?
Yep.
And Derek snapped that right up.
Yep. Also available on ebook.
And originally, when he told me about it, and I was all hot to read it, it's not very good. I wrote it a long time ago, and it's really horrible, and it's like, well, at least let me read it. And I read it, and I loved it, and I thought, he's probably going to say something. So I sent it to Tremblay and Langan and said, don't say anything. I just want your honest opinion, what you think of this. And they both loved it. So by the time I went back to him, it was like, in case you think I'm just biased, here, I got a couple other opinions that you're going to have a difficulty arguing with.
I would also throw in that if you like short stories, Secret Hours is the first book of Michael Cisco's that I ever read years and years ago.
I am scary biased on Secret Hours. As I've said, I sat there while some of those stories were being read in Bob Price's living room all those years ago. Bob and I argued when he was starting to put the book together to have certain things included, but he had his own vision. It's still a great book. And when the Centipede Press box set came out, I had the high privilege of getting to write the introduction for that book.
There's a Centipede box press of Secret Hours.
Secret Hours with 3 other novels.
Oh wow! I did not know this.
It's a 5-book box set. It's
not that I could afford it at Centipede Press, but I didn't know this.
Yeah, they did. We did the Divinity Student, the Golem, the Traitor, and the Tyrant, and Secret Hours in one box set.
Yeah. I mean, there was a part of me that was not going to write the intro because I didn't think that I should be the one. I thought there's a lot of other much more important, much more gifted people that could do a better job writing the intro. But Cisco said, well, I do want you to do it.
Yeah. I'm afraid I insisted, yes.
Yes.
I wanted you to.
And then there was one other thing that occurred to me in there after that, because it was, if I write this introduction, I'll get a copy of this box set.
That's right.
Yeah,
which, like you, Mike, I couldn't have afforded. So
Right.
it was like, you know.
the
So I
only
muddled-
Centipede Press book that I have is Willem's Centipede Press book. W.H. Pugmire, he gave it to me, and so I know from that book just how beautiful
they're
those
Jared-
editions are.
Jared Walters makes some of the most wonderful books you ever got your mitts on.
Yep.
Yeah,
They're just incredible books.
And he also did some wonderful soft covers too that are affordable in the Millipede imprint. I don't know if that's still viable, but they're important books like The Other by Thomas Tryon. He's done a lot of really. He did The Tenant by Roland Topor. He published that wonderful book. So yeah, he's got. Well, I mean, I can't say he's got good taste because he published me, but he has a pure blind spot. He's beautiful stuff.
You
Well,
guys,
thank-
And the other thing I really have to thank Cisco for
yeah,
is he's given me recommendations over the years. The very first thing, and again, this was one of those things at Bob Price's house. I distinctly remember being outside on the porch because I was out there smoking and Cisco was out hanging out. And Alfred Kubin, The Other Side,
Yes.
was the first thing he recommended to me. And just amazing every time he gives me a little recommendation list, how wonderful the works are. Not just important, but just marvels to read. So that's something I've always appreciated.
Well, Michael, thank you for being on
But
the show.
knowing
Coming
that
on.
we have another collection of short works in the offing, that's absolutely thrilling to me.
Yeah.
That's big news to me. It really is.
I'll make sure you get one.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for being here, Michael. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Oh
And,
yeah.
yeah. We're going to talk about a few other things for a few minutes. You're more than welcome to stay, or if you need to go, that's fine too. You just would have to close your browser window. So whatever you want to do is fine.
Okay, I'm fine to hang out for now.
Okay,
All right.
cool.
Pete Rollick,
what?
tell me about this. I'm really curious about this Dorian Gray anthology.
Oh yeah, this is I don't know if it was a secret, but was a little side thing that just came up and said, "Hey, Pete," somebody just called, and said, "Do you want to write a Dorian Gray story?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Well, crap! I just wrote a Richard Upton Pickman story for Matt Carpenter." I wish you had, if you had said something, 15 minutes, 15 days earlier, you could have had that. But, yeah. It's a small, there's only like 5 or 6 stories, but the whole idea is it's actually a sort of, it grows out of the Walt Newton expanded universe, which is this idea that you can cross over characters from different novels and work them in together.
And most importantly, how we got Rick on the show years ago.
Yeah. And, so I sat down and I said, I really don't, and I do this all the time. This is part of the process. People come to me and say, "Do you want to write a story about this?" And I say, "No, I don't have any ideas for that." And then 4 days later, I come back, "Okay, well, here's your story."
Right.
Just,
Yeah.
Who is publishing this?
that's a good question.
Well, my fascination with fiction, immortal characters in fiction.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to reading this.
Or who is editing it?
It was.
Do you know anything?
I don't know. You caught me by complete surprise.
That's all right.
Because I generally know everybody in Wad New.
It's sort of like Micah Harris is in it. I posted it on my Facebook page.
Yeah, that's how I know about it. So
Yeah, I know. Let me
how
look
I
at
know to ask you about it. So
Okay, so it's got David Blue in it, T. Casey Brennan, Micah Harris, Kevin Heim, Christopher Negro, Pete Rollick, and Robert Ronsky. And the publisher will be, I can't find the publisher. Wild Hunt.
Okay.
So yes.
to the live viewers, yes, Pete is laying in bed.
Yes, he's laying in bed because Pete is in a super amount of pain.
Oh, right.
Because Pete is old.
Yeah.
So.
I've got to look up who Wild Hunt is, because it sounds like a reference to Win Scott Ecker's Wild Huntsman.
Probably.
Which was a Wad Newton story.
No. Yeah, I take the my story is a certain artist is hired and taken over from Boston to Paris to study, and is hired there to restore the painting. And things go horribly wrong from there.
Yeah, they would.
Yeah,
if you restore that painting.
Yes.
And I think I know who the obvious artist would be.
Yes.
Boston.
It actually it ties back into several characters from Chambers' King in Yellow collection.
Oh,
the sculptors. Well, I just like, because I was trying to find a way to bridge the gap between those stories, which are very, very decadent, and the same sort of repetition, which is in the Picture of Dorian Gray, and build that relationship of this shared decadence.
Okay.
And
yeah,
go ahead.
I'm going to say Oscar Wilde fits in very well with The King in Yellow. As I'm trying to think, what was that story that was in? It was, I think, by Roger Johnson wrote it. There's a story with Dorian Gray in The King in Yellow.
Okay.
And that goes what was that anthology? Was Oblivion in the title?
Oh, Rehearsals for Oblivion.
It's in Rehearsals for Oblivion.
Yeah, Peter Worthy edited that. Yeah.
Yes.
And while we're talking about The King in Yellow, yes, I did twist Cisco's arm, and he wrote a King in Yellow story for me. He Will Be There, and never occurred to me Cisco's interpretation of what The King in Yellow looked like. Just I was it. It's my favorite visual representation. Never in a billion years would it occur to me. And when I read it, it's like, that's perfect. Of course, that's, so.
I want to mention that Embers by Kenneth W. Kane, is free on Kindle. A book called Embers. If you've not read Kenneth Kane's work, you can get a free introduction to it. Cain is spelled just like Cain in the Bible, I guess, C-A-I-N.
Okay.
So just go to Amazon, type in Kenneth Kane and Embers, and you can get that book for free right now.
Okay.
I forgot to mention last week that I was recently interviewed on This Is Horror and also on the Unnerving Magazine podcast. So the first hour of the This Is Horror podcast interview with me is out already. You can just Google that, and then the second part is going to be out tomorrow. And then for the one person who cares and is going to look this up, Unnerving Magazine podcast as well. If for anyone who's going to look up This Is Horror, and unnerving to listen to me go on for 3 hours. So, Repairman Jack, Pete, did you get this email from F. Paul Wilson? They're looking towards TV, and he can't say anymore because he doesn't know anymore.
I
It
saw
would
that.
be more perfect for like a Netflix series than a movie, I think. Don't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
And probably it could work as more realistic than horror.
Yeah.
Each
Because, I mean,
book could be a season, possibly.
well, it's like there are these short stories which read like The Punisher, that sort of vibe, and then you have the sort of early Repairman Jack stories which tie into the adversary and everything.
Right. Well, he's got this tradition every year. I forget which holiday or whatever, where he goes into Central Park and waits for somebody to mug him. Like waits for people to mug him and beats the crap out of them, takes their money, and then goes and donates it to some charity. So,
Really?
yeah, he's the tough guy.
Okay.
He's
So,
also in a young adult series, which is about him growing up.
Yeah, it doesn't really grab me.
No, I was saying there's a wide variety. The flavor of the stories can differ wildly.
That's true. They'll grab different people. The team up that no one ever wanted ever, Lois Lane and Lex Luthor, with the show Metropolis, may not happen. So that's awesome.
Okay, that's a complete non sequitur. So,
well, I'm going down my list.
Uh-huh.
We talked about Metropolis a couple of weeks ago.
Was I not here for that?
And I said, I don't know. Maybe I just said something and you tuned me out like you always do.
What? I'm sorry, what you say?
The Metropolis is this idea of a series before Superman arrives, which
I thought it was called Krypton.
No, that's different. Who the hell cares? And I just said, who the hell cares about Krypton? But it keeps surprising me. It's pretty good. So, wouldn't you say it's pretty good, Rick?
I have not watched it. But from what I just said, I'm aware of the big twist that came around, and that sounded very.
That is the best burn I've seen all day. But
Yeah. I thought he'd been watching it. All right. Well, as the voice of reason here, I will say that it's very good. Do not listen to Pete Rollick.
I will apologize. I'm working very hard on finishing the novel, and I'm tuning out all other media. So.
Oh, you are, huh?
Yes.
Okay. I saw the Castle Rock trailer last night. That looks actually pretty good.
When does that premiere?
I don't know. It's on Hulu, but I don't know.
Yeah, we have all these things like coming out at different dates, like Cloak and Dagger for Marvel is coming out June 7th. And
yeah, I hope soon because it actually looked really good. I also saw the Meg trailer, which I don't know. Jason Statham, is that how you say his name?
Yeah,
he has quite the emotional range. So
it kind of sounds like the way they're marketing it's a fun Jaws movie,
right?
They're playing this very kind of happy party music as it's destroying ships throughout the Atlantic, I guess.
If Jason Statham and the shark do not get into a car chase where they end up crashing and duking it out in the middle of the road, I'm not going to be satisfied.
What would the shark drive?
Don't ask that question.
A Tigeron.
It's like
that shark is too big. What is it, like 70 feet long? It looks like.
Yeah, it's big.
Can
it eat boats.
I'm tempted to talk a little bit about astronomy and science since both Philip and Kelly are not here today. They booed me down last week. Were you here, Pete?
No, I was picking up my son from his first year in college.
Right.
Yeah.
The scientist was gone. It makes sense now. They're like, we don't want to hear this shit. Shut up. You know, I was trying to talk about how big the Milky Way was and the vast gulf between us and the nearest galaxy, and they're like, we don't care. I'm like,
You may think it's a long drive down to the Costco.
That may be a good thing. That is a long distance, because God knows what's out there.
Yeah, and there's only a couple trillion stars for us to deal with in our galaxy. So
right. Yeah, exactly. So, all right, I'll shut up about astronomy. Okay, we have anything else to talk about before we go?
No? Okay.
You want what?
I thought you were going to attack me about my photoshopping skills.
I was thinking about it, but yeah, I think I will. Yeah, what do you use Photoshop? What
I don't even know what
editing
Photoshop
program
is.
do you use?
I don't know what Photoshop. I mean, I know what it is, but I wouldn't even know where to begin. My son I pay for all this stuff for my son, and I have no clue on how to use it.
Okay, I'm asking this question for those who are listening to this and going, "What? I don't understand." Pete caught a 6 foot
A 5.5 foot, 45-pound fish.
You said 6 before the show. Now it's 5.5.
Between 5 and 6 feet. Nobody measures these things anymore.
Okay. All right, 5.5 feet.
Fish. What else you need to know?
Fish.
I saw the picture. It's huge.
I put it up on the easy message board.
I looked at that picture yesterday and I was like, how does that even happen?
Yeah.
Wow.
And if you want to see how like the last 30 seconds of that happened, I posted the video on my Facebook page.
Oh, actually I do. I'm going to watch that video.
Yeah, it's only like the last 30 seconds, but I'll tell you how that happened. That took an hour. And I'm in a super amount of pain. You know that scene in The Burbs when Tom Hanks like throws himself into the ambulance?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm done. I've been blown up.
I love that movie.
Hospital. I have been. Advil has been my friend today. I'm really thankful that my wife threw a Cinco de Mayo party last night because tequila is my lady.
Yeah.
Just put me on a horizontal.
I just want to say that I think you have. You said it was an amberjack. Is that what?
Yes.
You may have misjudged it. It's from a rare species of Cthulhuoid fish. It's actually the child of something much larger.
Oh, okay. You know, all I will say is that fish are friends, not food. But no.
Fish are food, not friends.
Friends are food, not fish. Yeah, that friends are food, not fish.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know if we're having a show next week or not. It's up to you guys. It's Mother's Day, yeah. But yeah, if you guys want to have a show, I don't have a guest lined up for that very reason, but if you guys want to have a show, we'll have one. So just let me know this week.
Well, maybe you should check with Danielle.
That's all I have.
You should tell your wife first.
She doesn't like Mother's Day, actually.
Yeah, we might be voting Rollick temporal shift for holidays.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, well, we're like on this idea that we push Christmas back 7 days, and then we put, so we're always 7, so we don't have to deal with anything, and it works out really, really well.
Well, there's a much more important holiday coming up on the 11th.
Is that your birthday?
It is my birthday. Yes, I will be 20 something
for the 30th time.
Right.
Yeah, I'll be 47. So creeping up towards 50. Nowhere near Pulver, of course, but
yeah, what's Joe at, like 80, 82?
I think so.
Yeah, 82.
Pretty sure.
Yeah.
So there are days it feels like 82.
Joe is my age. It's true. Yeah. We're both born in 1955.
After that, on May the 20th, we've got Steve Rasnick Tim.
Oh, cool. He's wonderful.
Yeah, then Adam Neville, then Paul Tremblay.
Another great.
We've got some great guests lined up. Richard
And now
Trislar in July.
I had to recycle my entire. This is why I don't get to read anything I want to read in the order I want to read, because you bring up guests. I cannot not read this stuff and get it, ahead of the game.
Sounds like a real problem. I'm feeling for you.
Yeah.
Pete, don't you dare complain, Pete. I haven't been able to read since I collapsed last August and had brain surgery.
All right, you know what? You win. You win. You just played the old I'm old and sick card. You win.
I got both of these surgeries to go through before I get to read again.
Yeah.
So I'm not happy.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Rick.
No, I'm just saying. I feel for Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of stuff
Same here.
besides also when we want to get Joe back into writing.
Yeah, well, it'd be nice to be able to see things good enough where I could write too. That'd be interesting.
You just need a dictaphone.
Yeah.
And well, speaking of Joe writing, that's the next book that Lovecraftian Press has coming out.
Mhm.
It's called A Long, Dark, Grim Road by Joe Pulver. Dave Felton did the cover, which I posted a few weeks ago on Facebook, and it may be one of the best covers I've ever seen. It's incredible. So Joe can't. Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
I was going to say
I was just going to say that Joe Pulver can't write right now, but he sent me that right before he got sick. Just he wanted me to read it and see what I thought of it, I guess, and I said I want to publish this, and he said okay. So
yeah, which I was shocked, but shocking is Joe Pulver actually wrote a linear story. It's like it starts at A and it goes to Z, and wow.
And I don't want to give anything away, but there's a road in it, and it's long and dark and grim.
I hear it's grim.
And it's grim.
Yeah.
Is that with one M or two?
That's with one.
Just one. Just one.
All right. Well, thank you.
There's only one Pulver trick in the whole story, and the story, it works.
Did you use up
the trick works?
Did you use up the gross product of the United States in exclamation points?
No, I don't think there's many exclamation marks in the whole thing.
Are there any? I'm trying to think of any.
I don't know that there are any.
Yeah. It's a great story. Getting back to that guest list, in August, I'm skipping around, but in August we've got Victor LaValle, Glenn Hirschberg. So we got some great guests coming up.
Yep.
And we had a great one today too. Thank you for being there, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thanks, guys, as always, for being on the show with me, and thanks everyone for listening. We will maybe talk to you next week. If not, then the Sunday after, May the 20th. Thanks for listening.
Take care.
Yeah, thanks.